This time, on combat ships. Breakthrough vessels that made history.
These guns were not something that you wanted to be on the wrong side of. You're looking at a scene that's more out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre than anything else.
Ships that were experimental.
There were no computer programs, there were no software packages to calculate what was going to happen. They just had to build a deck and try it.
Ships that were revolutionary, but vulnerable.
If you're carrying, 10,000 tons of explosives, you're a floating bomb.
And the people who made them game changers.
She is one of the grandmothers of the computer age.
It normally takes 2 years to do the rough draft. I brought that rascal in 18 hours and 26 minutes.
Combat ships. Fast, effective.
His orders were to find the British and to pick a fight.
Going right to the heart of the battle.
The Marines have always thought of themselves as the spear point of United States military power. Their whole doctrine of combat was to go fast, hit hard, get it over with in a hurry.
Combat ships have changed the world.
She gained her freedom. Now she's going down the river with an army. She was like, we're about to show you what we're working with.
Thanks to clever design, raw firepower, and the heroism of their crews.
The rule of thumb on a frigate is you can lose 2 spaces and stay afloat. But if you lose a third, you go to Davy Jones's locker in a hurry.
On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese mini-sub HA-19 washed up on a Hawaiian beach. 2 miles away, Pearl Harbor was ablaze. The sub's mission was to strike at the ships in the harbor, but its compass failed. One crew member drowned, and the other was captured. But the sub's journey was far from over. The US government recognized a propaganda opportunity when they saw one. It was put on the back of a truck and sent all over the country. Hundreds of thousands of people paid to look inside.
One report is that the war bonds people donated for this to get on and see this thing actually paid for all the damage at Pearl Harbor.
In November 1943, the sub arrived in Little Rock, Arkansas. Admission was $1 for children and $5 for adults. One of those who paid to go into the submarine was 7-year-old Ray Montague.
She didn't know what was going on. She just knew that she was going out for, a day trip. They let her go down inside, and she crawled down, and she said it had a really unique kind of smell. But she just started imagining what it was like to be someone that was living inside that submarine. And so she looked around and saw all these dials and gauges and levers.
One of the Japanese crews steered while the other operated the valves that controlled diving and surfacing. Armed with 2 torpedoes, it had a range of only 100 miles, so a larger sub had to tow it to its target.
So she asked, I guess what any little kid would want to know, how do you learn how to do something like this? And the person that she was talking to basically said, to do this, you have to be an engineer to build something like this. But don't worry, you don't ever have to worry about that. And so obviously the implication there was because it's a segregated South, being an engineer was a male-dominated field, and adding to that, being an African-American, and the lack of access to education were barriers, but she didn't realize that she had been insulted. She just figured, well, there's a lot for me to learn.
Young Ray vowed to become an engineer. But in Arkansas, African-American women weren't allowed to study engineering. So instead, she graduated in 1956 from Arkansas Agricultural, Mechanical, and Normal College, today Arkansas Pine Bluff, with a degree in science and business. Still determined to become an engineer, Ray headed to Washington and secured a job with the Navy as one of the few black women working in the Applied Mathematics Lab.
Even with her excellent grades, even with her college degree in business, they started off as a clerk typist, which is the lowest position. So it was not an application of her degree at all.
Ray was undaunted. Her department had computers, large and unwieldy, but for the 1950s, cutting edge. Ray learned how to work them by watching other people. Then one day, all the operators called in sick.
And so she started hitting the dials and flipping stuff. Somebody came in and pulled her away from the machine and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm operating the equipment," you know? And they said, "Well, you're not an engineer. You're not allowed to touch this, you know, multi-million-dollar piece of equipment here, you know?" And so I think the person thought that she was gonna get in trouble and went and reported her. And then the upper management came in to see what she was doing and said, "Fine, if you're good, if you can handle this, then we're gonna give you more responsibilities, because apparently you know how to do this without having gone through the formal training."
Despite the discrimination she faced, Ray became an expert computer operator for the Navy in the 1950s and 1960s. Ray often worked late into the night. David would come with her.
I guess she didn't realize that you weren't supposed to be bringing your family members. But she was dedicated to getting the job done. I was taught how to do punch cards and program, and that was kind of how I spent the time amusing myself, entertaining myself. I didn't realize it was actually a skill that you could get a job doing at the time. It was just fun, like a toy.
When Richard Nixon won the presidency in 1968, he was determined to rebuild the Navy. He wanted new ships for a new decade.
The American Navy at this time was looking for what they call the low end of the mix. They needed a lot of relatively cheap surface competence to replace the old World War II destroyers and destroyer escorts.
President Nixon was in a hurry. The Navy turned to one of its leading computer operators. Ray was given a project that seemed to be an impossible task: to lay out step by step how a new warship might be designed using a computer. That had never been done before.
It normally takes 2 years to do the rough draft. The president has given the Navy 2 months. I brought that rascal in 18 hours and 26 minutes.
Ray's design became the FFG-7, or Oliver Hazard Perry class of guided missile frigates. The frigate was a game changer, the first ship made by computer. In April 1988, for the first time, the FFG-7 class was tested in battle. The USS Simpson was part of a 3-ship surface action group in the Persian Gulf that attacked an Iranian oil platform. The Iranians wanted revenge. They deployed a gunboat named the Joshan, armed with Harpoon missiles.
It's about a 500-pound warhead, and it's a big flying telephone pole besides. It can take out a warship.
The commanding officer of the cruiser USS Wainwright, the lead ship of the action group, ordered the Joshan to stop or be sunk.
At that point, the Joshan locked up the Wainwright on fire control radar. Wainwright fired chaff. Joshan fired a Harpoon missile at the Wainwright, and Wainwright called me and said, batteries released.
Jim gave the order to fire. The Simpson launched a Standard missile at a range of 13 miles.
Joshan's missile, the Harpoon, flew at about Mach 0.7, 0.75. My Standard missile flew at Mach 2.5. So the Standard missile actually got to Joshan before the Harpoon got to Wainwright.
The Joshan was hit and sank in flames.
Every system worked exactly as it was supposed to. Every sailor did his job. It was just true professionals doing what they did and doing it flawlessly.
Ray Montague's ship had performed well. Her influence was felt throughout the Navy. In the 1970s and 80s, she worked on submarines, aircraft carriers, and landing helicopter assault craft.
She is, I would think, in many ways, one of the grandmothers of the computer age.
Ray died in October 2018.
I feel so good when I hear about some of the ships that I've worked on still being in the fleet, and to know that I'm still fighting for my country. I had to fight like the devil to get in there to do what I needed to do. But look at what I was done, and look at how our guys and gals are using this stuff and defending our country. So the little girl who saw the sub when I was 7, I would tell her now, you can do it, you can handle it, and the important thing for you is to open doors for other people.
When the USS Simpson was decommissioned in 2015, it was the last active U.S. Navy vessel to sink an enemy ship. That honor now lies with the Navy's longest commissioned vessel, another iconic game changer. In the early 19th century, Britannia ruled the waves with a fleet of over 600 ships, bigger than the fleets of its nearest rivals, France and Spain, combined. The British ships needed crews. Sailors from other nations were seized. Many of them were American.
Our merchant ships were being stopped, sailors were being pressed, forced to serve in the Royal Navy. That didn't settle well in the United States.
By 1812, the Americans had enough. They declared war on their former colonial master. But how could they hope to take on the British and win? The American Navy only had about 20 seagoing vessels, and most of them were in bad shape. But the United States had a secret weapon, a game changer. A ship that would become the most iconic vessel in American history. The USS Constitution. USS Constitution was designed by shipbuilder Joshua Humphreys.
Joshua Humphreys advocated that we build frigates, but not traditional frigates, frigates that were a bit longer, more heavily built, stronger than traditional European models, so they would be an outmatch for a typical European frigate.
Frigates were the swift, lonely, brave hunters of the sea. They tended to capture the public's imagination more than other ships or ship captains were likely to.
America's Navy would still be far outnumbered, but with the right frigates, they could take the British on, ship to ship. So Humphreys built a frigate made of expensive solid oak, over 22 inches thick.
We couldn't build iron ships back then, but she was so strong she seemed as if she were an iron ship.
Constitution was equipped with 20 32-pounder carronades and 30 24-pounder guns, 4 more than British frigates. Their weight posed a problem. Wooden ships bent at the bow and stern, where there was less support from the water.
It was even more true with Constitution, with the larger number of heavier guns. So one of the features that Constitution had incorporated into its construction that allowed its design to be feasible were these large diagonally laid frames stretching from the keel up to the next deck.
These so-called diagonal riders supported the weight at either end of the ship. Constitution carried its 50 guns with ease. Now, it would have to prove its worth in battle. In August 1812, the Constitution sailed from Boston on the hunt for British ships. Its captain was 39-year-old Isaac Hull.
He was looking for a fight. His orders were to find a British ship and attack. Every great captain, that's how you made your bones. That's how you gained respect of your peers and of your crew, in not just sailing around and going from point A to point B. You earned your stripes in combat.
On August 19th, 600 miles from Boston, the Constitution spotted the British frigate HMS Guerrière. With 38 guns, the Guerrière was smaller, but still formidable, and under the command of Captain James Dacres.
And his mission was similar: find an American warship and pick a fight. Guerrière fired first from several hundred yards, and the balls were getting close, and the Constitution crew was starting to get nervous because Isaac Hull had not ordered a return fire yet.
He had trained his crew for just this moment.
Hull waited at the guns until they were really close, and then they were able to give a full broadside to Guerrière.
These guns were not something that you wanted to be on the wrong side of. When you came to the ship to see the damage, you're looking at a scene that's more out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre than anything else. Bits of bone and blood and brain would be about the sides of the ship because these cannons would tear people apart.
The Guerrière fought back. Constitution's thick oak hull was tested in battle. It was a key moment in U.S. naval history.
Cannonballs are ricocheting off the sides, and a sailor sees this happen live action and shouts out, "Huzzah, her sides are made of iron!" And it's a rallying cry for all sailors that are fighting in the war that we have ships so strong they're almost as if they're made of iron.
Ever since, the Constitution has been known as Old Ironsides. But the battle was far from over.
Constitution's fire was having incredible impact, hit the mizzenmast. Guerrière lost the mast, and once the two ships collide and then the rigging pulls down Guerrière's masts, no more ability to maneuver. They described her as being a floating log, a perfect wreck in the sea.
Guerrière's British captain, James Dacres, surrendered to the Americans.
Constitution came back into Boston to a hero's welcome, and then 2 more American frigates had victories following that. So in the fall, we were beating Britain, Queen of the Seas, something no one had ever imagined in their lifetime. It was a great PR and morale boost for the young country.
Our U.S. Navy core values of courage, commitment, and honor. This ship is a physical embodiment of those values. She also represents something very important, maritime excellence. This ship has been in 33 naval engagements and is undefeated, 33 victories and 0 defeats, and something that should be cherished by the American people and celebrated, and that's why she's still around today and why she's visited by over 500,000 visitors each and every year, and always will be.
Game changers come in all sizes. A century after the Constitution's victory, one small boat with a large torpedo took out a Russian battleship. In the early years of the 20th century, motorboat racing was the hot trend in America and Europe. The need for speed encouraged sleeker designs and faster engines. Soon, this technology was put to military use in the navies of World War I.
In the very early years of the war, the German Navy was sending their fleets over to bombard the English coast, and the British really had no response. They couldn't get to these fleets in time to intercept them before they had achieved their objective and then retreated back across to the German and Belgian coasts. So in response to this, 3 young naval officers came up with this idea of using the racing boats that they'd seen before the war to arm them with torpedoes so that they could go and attack the enemy fleets in their own harbours.
The British Admiralty liked the plan. In August 1916, 6 coastal motorboats, or CMBs, were delivered to the Royal Navy. This is the most famous of all, CMB-4. The CMB was powered by a lightweight internal combustion engine and was able to reach speeds of 35 knots, almost 10 knots faster than any Navy cruiser. This was achieved by a revolutionary feature called a step, an indentation in the hull that caused the bow of the boat to lift out of the water as it moved. As the lightweight boat rose up, there was much less friction between the bottom of the boat and the water, and so greater speed. CMBs had a crew of 3, 2 officers and a mechanic, and were armed with a Lewis machine gun and a single 16-foot Whitehead torpedo.
They carried a small explosive warhead charge at the front of them, which, if it hit the underwater part of a ship's hull, could do tremendous damage. And usually one torpedo was enough to sink your average warship.
It was fired with a ram which had an explosive charge, and it was like a 1-inch punch. It sort of nudged the torpedo and sent it sliding out the back of the boat.
Firing the torpedo was dangerous. The CMB's speed was roughly the same as the torpedo, so it had to turn swiftly out of the way to avoid being sunk by its own weapon.
The coastal motorboat really was a game changer. This was the perfect fusion of 3 important aspects of design: the small, lightweight internal combustion engine, the fast hydroplane hull skimming across the surface of the water, and the powerful, game-changing torpedo weapon.
The CMBs formed the Royal Navy's first flotilla of small attack craft, which after the war came to be known as coastal forces. They had their first success in 1917, when they sank a German destroyer in the English Channel. A year later, they laid vital smokescreens during an attack on a heavily defended German naval base. But the CMB's greatest moment was still to come. After the armistice in November 1918, Britain went to war against the new Bolshevik government in Russia, backing the Tsarist White Russian cause.
They used secret agents operating out of St. Petersburg to try and help understand what was happening behind the Red Army's lines.
The game-changing CMBs were perfect for dropping spies. They could skim over the many minefields the Bolsheviks had laid in the approach to St. Petersburg. The Royal Navy loaned CMB-4 and CMB-7 to the British Secret Service. In May 1919, the Secret Service set up a base at Teriaki in neutral Finland, just 3 miles from the Russian border. From there, the CMBs repeatedly sped into St. Petersburg, successfully dropping off and collecting agents. The officer in charge was 29-year-old Lieutenant Augustus Agar.
Well, he was a very resolute man. He was a professional. He joined the Navy at the age of 15, and he served all over the world. He was a professional at sea during the whole of the war, and obviously quite daredevil and charismatic.
In early June 1919, the nearby Russian fortress of Krasnaya Gorka rebelled against the Bolsheviks. Red Army warships arrived and used their formidable guns to bombard the rebels into submission. Agar vowed to intervene.
And he thought, and was told by his informants, that if that could be stopped and the fort remained in White Russian hands, other forts or towns would follow suit.
The most lethal ship was the Russian heavy gun cruiser, Oleg, armed with 12-inch guns and 12 11-pounders. Oleg was protected by minefields and a shield of destroyers. Agar believed that his 2 CMBs could sink it. He wrote,
"Surely they could provide, like a couple of Hornets, the very sting to drive away those red bombarding ships and help the fortress hold out."
But the plan soon went wrong. CMB-7 broke her propeller shaft. Agar and the crew of CMB-4 would have to go it alone, with just 1 shot at the Oleg. On the night of June 17th, they set sail for the Bolshevik fleet.
The weather was apparently force 3 or 4, quite nasty enough for a small boat doing 30 knots. He had to go over minefields, which were dangerous because they were always breaking loose. It was a very hazardous trip, because if you'd broken down or anything happened to him, there was nobody to rescue him. They would have been picked up and shot.
Agar and his crew moved in for the kill. He wrote,
"Throwing all caution to the winds, I put on all speed and headed straight for the Oleg, which was now clearly visible."
At a range of 500 yards, Agar launched the torpedo. Holed below the waterline, the Oleg sank in minutes. Under fire from the Russians, Agar sped back to base. The Bolsheviks refused to believe that one of their finest vessels could be sunk by such a small boat.
By all accounts, they wouldn't accept the fact it was done by the CMB. They put out that it was attacked by submarine.
The British top brass immediately recognized that the crew of CMB-4 had achieved something special.
According to his diary, they were given a hot tot of rum, and they all went to sleep. An agent arrived, and they were all hauled out of their bunks and told to appear somewhere, and that photograph was taken a few hours after the attack. I think he still had his pajama trousers on.
Agar was awarded the Victoria Cross for his bravery. The legacy of the CMB lived on in the powerful motor gunboats and motor torpedo boats of the Second World War. The First World War introduced another game changer. It revolutionized naval warfare, taking aircraft to the enemy. In the First World War, the Allied powers faced a new threat. Attack from the air from a silent killer, the German Zeppelin. At 11,000 feet, they turned off their engines and dropped their deadly payload of 2 tons of bombs.
Zeppelins were quite a modest physical threat to the majority of the British public, but they were a huge psychological threat, a change in the very nature of warfare.
Suddenly, death came from above. Zeppelins seemed invincible. Too high for most aircraft of the Royal Flying Corps, and too hard for anti-aircraft gunners to spot at night. Fighter plane bullets pierced the Zeppelin's hydrogen bags, but didn't blow them up. The British Royal Navy solved the problem. This is the revolutionary Seaplane Lighter, the world's oldest aircraft-carrying vessel. The lighter was a towable platform, originally designed to carry flying boats out to sea to increase their range.
They could actually fit a seaplane within a hollow section of the hull, and they could be towed behind Royal Navy destroyers. Then they would stop in the water, the seaplane would be launched off of the back of the seaplane lighter and would then take off from the water in the normal way.
Seaplanes couldn't fly high enough to attack Zeppelins, but the British soon saw that the lighter had the potential to be much more.
It wasn't long before the Admiralty began to realize that if you could tow this craft 20 knots plus, and maybe with a flight deck on it, or a flying off deck as they called it at the time, with a fighter aircraft on it into a 15 to 20 knot sea breeze, you would get a cross-deck wind speed of about 40 to 45 knots. That made them think it was possible perhaps to kite launch from the deck, being towed at full speed.
They chose a new fighter, the Sopwith Camel. It was small, strong, and unlike seaplanes, could reach Zeppelin altitudes. And by 1918, it was equipped with incendiary ammunition capable of blowing up a Zeppelin's hydrogen bags. On land, its range of 200 miles was not enough to intercept Zeppelins before they reached Britain. By then, it was too late. But towed out to sea on a seaplane lighter, it could change everything. It worked on paper. On water, reality kicked in. The first seaplane lighter had a flat deck. As it picked up speed, the front rose. This meant the plane lifted too early and immediately stalled. The designers then raised the rear, so as the lighter sped through the water, the deck had a downward slope. The pilot was able to retain control as he lifted off.
There were no computer programs, there were no software packages to calculate what was going to happen. They just had to build a lighter, build a deck, and try it.
In July 1918, Lieutenant Stuart Cully, an American-born pilot with the Royal Naval Air Service, successfully launched his Sopwith Camel from a seaplane lighter for the first time. The modern aircraft carrier was born. Just a few weeks later, on August 11th, Cully and his camel were being towed by the destroyer, HMS Redoubt, part of a Royal Navy force out in the North Sea looking for Zeppelins. At 8:24 in the morning, they spotted Zeppelin L-53 heading for them.
Is it going to attack Great Britain? They don't know. Is it going to report their position? They don't know. So they need to stop that Zeppelin. Cully's very keen to get airborne in his Camel.
Getting airborne is just the first part. It would take almost an hour to climb to the Zeppelin's altitude. If the Germans realize that Cully is coming, even a slow-moving Zeppelin will have plenty of time to get out of range. The seaplane lighter had a trick up its sleeve. The Navy painted an outline of a plane on its deck to fool the Germans into thinking that it hadn't taken off yet.
There are some indications that possibly this is what fooled the crew of L-53 and that they loitered too long in the area.
Finally, at 19,000 feet, the young American opened fire.
Bright flash was seen in the sky, and then clouds of debris started to fall down to the sea. Cully had made his attack exactly as the Zeppelin was making a signal to base, successfully engaging it and destroying it.
Stuart Cully was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his bravery. There were no more Zeppelin raids on Britain after his daring attack. The exploits of Cully and other pilots showed the effectiveness of taking planes out to sea. Within a decade, massive aircraft carriers were built across the world. The seaplane lighter was a turning point, proof that aircraft go out to sea and take on the enemy. Sometimes, to win a war, you don't need massive guns or an impressive fleet. You need a game-changing, mass-produced vessel that's still able to defend itself. December 28th, 1944. A convoy codenamed Uncle Plus 13 was sailing from Seattle to the Philippines. At the heart of the convoy was the merchant ship, the SS John Burke. She had a crew of 68 and a cargo of ammunition and explosives for the fight against the Japanese. The John Burke was known as a Liberty ship.
Liberty ships carried absolutely everything. They were the backbone of the mercantile marine of the Allies. And sometimes that included explosives. And if you're carrying, 10,000 tons of explosives, you're a floating bomb.
At about 8:15 a.m., 3 kamikazes appeared on the horizon. One plane was hit, but the pilot locked on target. The SS John Burke disintegrated. All 68 of her crew were lost. The shockwave was so strong, other ships in the convoy thought they'd been hit by a torpedo. The SS John Burke was one of over 200 Liberty ships lost in World War II. They are the unsung heroes of the conflict. True game changers. No Allied amphibious assault or land campaign would have been possible without them. Only a few Liberty ships survive today. One is moored in Baltimore, the mighty John W. Brown. The Liberty ships were a response to an emergency.
Merchant shipping suffered quite serious losses in the early part of the war. And the British were worried that they were losing more than they could afford. And it seemed that building ships in the United States was an obvious way forward. And production really took off.
America was termed the arsenal of democracy in World War II because most of the war material was being produced in this country. And the urgent requirement was to get that material from the shores of this country to wherever it was needed in the world.
A Liberty ship could carry almost 9,000 tons of cargo. about the same as 300 railroad boxcars. They were built at remarkable speed, assembled in prefabricated sections, revolutionary for the time.
And the size of these prefabricated or modular sections was only limited by the size of the cranes that the shipyard had available to lift them and put them on the building ways, attach them to the rest of the ship.
The Liberty ships helped bring about a construction revolution and a social one.
You don't think of the shipbuilding industry as an industry that will attract women, but by the end of the war, about 15% of the workforce in the shipyards set up by the Maritime Commission were women, and an awful lot of the welders were women.
Once at sea, slow-moving Liberty ships were vulnerable to attack, but they were not defenseless. They were crewed by a branch of the Navy known as the Armed Guard. One of the key weapons at their disposal was the Oerlikon.
The Oerlikon 20mm automatic cannon, and I say cannon because this fires an exploding projectile. That's why it's not called a machine gun. This projectile will cause a 2-foot diameter hole in any aircraft.
It was so successful that both sides, the Allies and the Axis, equipped their ships with this cannon.
The gun is very flexible. It moves fast, and it is good for surface targets and aerial targets. The projectiles would be in a 60-round drum magazine, which is easily detachable. But our rate of fire is about 6 rounds per second. So that's about as fast as you can blink your eyes. You strap into the gun, become one with it, and then you use the kickers to move and traverse the gun.
One Liberty ship proved just how effective its guns could be face to face with the enemy. On September 27, 1942, the SS Stephen Hopkins was off the coast of South America on her maiden voyage when it spotted what looked like 2 German merchant ships. But one, the Steer, had a deadly secret. It was a commerce raider.
The Germans used disguised merchant ships as commerce raiders. They armed them with 6-inch guns, and they prowled the seas trying to capture ships. They would put the flag up at the last minute and unfurl the guns, and they would capture the ships and make prizes of them.
But the crew of the Stephen Hopkins had no intention of being anyone's prize. The armed guard turned their 4-inch gun on the German ships, successfully hitting them below the waterline. The Germans didn't expect a merchant ship to offer much resistance.
It must have been extremely surprised, and I suspect that's one reason that the Liberty ship was able to score so many hits.
It was a bloody encounter. Many of the armed guard were killed. But as men fell, others took their place. For 30 minutes, the ships slugged it out. Soon, both the Steer and the Liberty ship were on fire and sinking.
Stephen Hopkins was mortally wounded, and that ship would sink, but Steer was also mortally wounded and sunk.
The slow-moving Liberty ship, built to carry cargo, not fight, won the day.
It's one of the most phenomenal naval events that occurred in World War II.
Only 19 of the crew of the Stephen Hopkins survived the encounter. But they could boast theirs was the only Liberty ship to sink a German warship. Game changers have won battles and shown their quality, often at great cost. A sacrifice that should always be remembered.